So today, President Biden finally gave us some good news. And for all of us that have been tired of hearing this bad news over and over, it's finally good to hear some good news. But what exactly did President Biden say? Well, let's address that. Today he said, and I quote, "Inflation at the grocery stores, thank God, is beginning to slow. Prices for things like clothes, television, and appliances are going down. That's good news for the holiday season." And he's right. That is very good news. And of course, we want to continue to hear more great news just like this. However, that good news is short-lived, and I want to explain what's going on at the moment. There is something that's happening right now that could actually cause upward inflation, and I want to address what that is. Because as of right now, Congress has to decide between the better of two evils. First, do they let a railroad strike happen as soon as December 9th? Or, and this is the most likely scenario, Congress will come out by tomorrow and actually force union workers to accept the tentative agreement to avert a strike altogether. Well, we have more information on that. Today, President Biden met with Nancy Pelosi, met with Mitch McConnell, met with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and met with the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Those are what we call the Big Four. And in this meeting, they talked about the potential nationwide railroad strike, what they should do, should they pass legislation, and when should they pass this? Well, we got updates on that. According to the reports just this afternoon, the Big Four are all in agreement that this legislation and blocking a potential railroad strike has to happen before this weekend. And why? Because companies are already preparing to pull cargo off the railroads to prepare for the potential strike. Now, unless a strike is blocked, companies are going to have to start pulling products. So, if we want to really make sure that we avert any issues, then we have to pass legislation on this by this weekend. And again, this is a strike that nobody wants to see happen, but at the same time, Congress is really between a rock and a hard place because they have to decide, do they push people back to work and force them to accept an agreement that they've already voted down, or do they let the economy pretty much go into a tailspin simply because we're headed for a strike? Well, Nancy Pelosi had this to say just today. She said, from a timing standpoint, right now, what we need to do is avoid the strike. Well, we know that. We even heard from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and he said, we had a really good meeting and laid out the challenges that we're all collectively facing here. Now, Nancy Pelosi also stated that she is going to put a bill on the floor of the House by tomorrow morning. That is Wednesday morning. What does this mean? Well, here's what she had to say. She said, and I quote, "It's not everything I would like to see. I think that we should have some paid sick leave. And I don't like going against the ability of unions to strike, but weighing the equities, we must avoid a strike." Now, here's the thing. The expectation is that the House of Representatives will easily pass this bill. They won't have any issues with this legislation. However, that's a different story in the Senate. According to a few reports just this afternoon, there are multiple senators that are not happy with forcing Congress to vote on this crisis, especially, and again, they don't want to get in the middle of this, especially people like Senator Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio from Florida, he had this to say, and I quote, "Just because Congress has the authority to impose a heavy-handed solution does not mean we should." And he said he would oppose the bill. We also heard from Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont. He had this to say, and I quote, "Workers all over this country who work for the railroads, people who are working at dangerous jobs and inclement weather, have zero paid sick leave? That is outrageous." And so right there are two senators who are on completely different spectrums here. Two senators that are in agreement that no, they do not want to vote to force the union to accept this tentative agreement. But when people ask Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, how many members does he think will actually back this bill? His exact quote was, "You'll have to ask our members. I think some may be inclined to vote against it, and others are arguing that the economic price of doing that is too great." Well, let's touch on that for a second. For those that are considering voting against this legislation, which means they're voting in support of these workers going on strike, well, the issue in what Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell just said is they're arguing that the economic price of doing this is too great. Again, here's the thing. If you go and vote against a bill that is going to force workers back to work instead of going on strike, well, we get it. We understand it. But here's the issue. If you let workers go on strike, this is going to not just impact those 115,000 workers. That's going to impact millions and millions of people, not just here in the United States, but in other countries as well. So not only are we getting some pushback and urgency from business groups here in the United States, according to reports, other countries are reaching out to potentially avoid this. Have President Biden and the Biden administration avoid a strike, because not only will it impact the United States, it will impact every single country around us. And again, this is just part of the problem. But another problem, even though it is expected that this legislation tomorrow morning is going to pass through the House of Representatives, it does not mean it's going to pass through the Senate. According to reports, once it gets to the Senate, there's a good chance it will not pass because it will not meet the filibuster. This would be filibuster, which means it has less than 60 votes. That is a major problem. So even though this bill could pass as soon as tomorrow, the expectation is the Senate will likely have to negotiate this, change some things around, vote on this, which would probably happen next week, send it back to the House, they would vote on it, and then it would go to President Biden's desk. That's a problem. And the reason why this is a problem, because we need to get this passed by this weekend to avoid any issues. So again, that's what we got as of right now. President Biden says this is good news. We do have some good news because we could potentially see downward pressure on inflation. And if we do see the railroad strike be averted, guess what? That's more downward pressure. So a lot more good news. And I think we can all agree this is exactly what we need. We need downward pressure on inflation so we can hold on to and retain a little bit more of our money. But again, we will see what happens. As soon as I know more about this railroad strike, I promise to come back on and let you know all the latest news and updates. Again, just want to thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the next one.